We tend to think of deadly diseases as being caused by microscopic organisms like viruses or bacteria. But deadly doesn't always mean contagious. In fact, there are plenty of deadly diseases that only affect their victims directly, like mad cow disease or Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease, which is the human equivalent of mad cow. Those pathogens don't spread through the air or via bodily fluids, but they do cause a lot of pain and death. But what if there was a pathogen out there that killed not just people, but also dinosaurs? Well, we know there already is. It's called asteroid, also known as Chicxulub. And it's the reason why Earth today is a very different place than it was 66 million years ago. So let's say asteroid never happened, and we found ourselves in a world where non-avian dinosaurs not only existed, but were thriving. Let's also assume that there was some kind of global health crisis, something big enough to be considered a pandemic. How would it unfold? What kinds of decisions would need to be made? How would our relationship with the natural world change forever? If you think about the history of pandemics, they all have one thing in common. They involve an infectious agent spreading from animals to humans. Avian flu, for example, jumped from birds to people. COVID-19 jumped from bats to people, likely via an intermediate animal host. And even the bubonic plague, which was brought to Europe by rats, originally infected wild rodents in Asia. The story is much the same for fictional pandemics in movies like Contagion or Rabbit Hole. But what if the roles were reversed, and humans found themselves facing a pandemic that originated in dinosaurs? First things first, which dinosaurs are we talking about? Assuming we're in a world where asteroid never happened, we can take our pick from any of the roughly 800 species of non-avian dinosaurs alive today. To keep things simple, let's imagine that this is a pandemic caused by a fungus that affects only sauropods. For the most part, these are some of the largest dinosaurs, including Diplodocus, Argentinosaurus, and Titanosaurus. Sauropods are primarily herbivores, so the fungus probably wouldn't be transmitted through their meat. And being cold-blooded, they spend most of their time basking, making them easy targets for opportunistic fungal spores. Sauropod dinosaurs would probably succumb to something similar to amphibian chytrotomyces, which affects frogs. This disease has devastated amphibian populations worldwide and could easily wipe out sauropods in the wild. However, if there were still sauropods in zoos, we would need to take drastic measures to contain the disease and stop it from spreading. For example, the United States has strict regulations on who can import certain animals and plants. These biosecurity measures are designed to prevent invasive species from entering the country. So if the fungus had come from another country, the U.S. government would likely block any further imports from that nation. Similarly, international travel would be restricted for anyone coming from areas where the disease was prevalent. But no matter how hard we tried to keep it out, the fungus would eventually find its way into the United States. At that point, the CDC would quickly establish quarantine zones around affected areas and start developing a vaccine. But unlike diseases that affect only humans, a vaccine for a dinosaur-specific disease wouldn't help the dinosaurs already infected. Even worse, the presence of a deadly fungus might lead to an increase in poaching. After all, if a devastating disease is killing off sauropods in the wild, poachers might see an opportunity to make a profit before they disappear. So authorities would need to patrol protected areas to ensure the safety of remaining dinosaurs. In addition to a vaccine, we'd also need to develop effective treatments. And since fungi can be tricky to fight, this could prove difficult. Fortunately, this is where we hit our first major roadblock. Unlike mammals and birds, reptiles don't have an immune system that produces antibodies to fight off infections. Fungi can be treated with antifungal medications like itraconazole or voriconazole, but these work by boosting the patient's immune system to fight the infection. So they would likely be ineffective against sauropods. Plus, we don't really have experience giving these drugs to large reptiles. One option would be to try treating the dinosaurs with fluconazole, an antifungal medication used to treat everything from athlete's foot to life-threatening infections. But while fluconazole has been given to Galapagos tortoises, the doses needed to treat a life-threatening infection haven't been established. So this would be a case of trial and error. And we would need to move fast because sauropods wouldn't be the only ones at risk. As with the Black Death, the fungus could eventually mutate and jump to humans. If that happened, the pandemic would enter a second phase. Even though they have antibodies, humans have a lot in common with amphibians and reptiles. which means we aren't necessarily safe from a deadly fungus. And it wouldn't be the first time that a disease from another animal had infected us. Zoonotic diseases like COVID-19, the plague, Ebola, and HIV have all jumped from other animals to humans. So while a fungus that kills dinosaurs might sound pretty cool, it would pose a serious threat to us too. Our best bet would be to follow the same procedures we use for pandemics caused by viruses and bacteria. That means vaccines, quarantines, and contact tracing, along with a good old-fashioned stay-at-home order. These measures might not completely stop the fungus from spreading, but they could slow down its transmission, allowing more time for research into effective treatments. But here's the thing. None of those things would actually help the dinosaurs. If anything, our efforts to control the pandemic would likely lead to more deaths among dino populations. That's because the affected individuals would need to be euthanized, either because their suffering would become unbearable, or because the fungus could be spreading before we even knew about it. As with COVID-19, we would need to euthanize some dinosaurs simply to keep the rest of the population safe. And like with COVID-19, people would likely have strong opinions about this. After all, we live in a society where pets receive advanced medical care and people spend thousands of dollars to save the lives of their beloved animals. Would we really be willing to euthanize a dinosaur to save a human life? And if not, should we try to develop treatments that would also benefit dinosaurs instead of focusing on a vaccine? There's no easy answer. But ultimately, it would come down to a question of resources. The truth is, even if we did develop a treatment, we would need to prioritize those who would benefit the most. And unfortunately, that would be humans. Even if we could safely administer a drug to a dinosaur, doing so wouldn't necessarily prevent them from spreading the fungus to other dinosaurs. So we'd be left with two terrible options. Either we would let the fungus continue to spread unchecked, resulting in the loss of hundreds of lives, or we would euthanize most of the remaining dinosaurs to prevent it from spreading to humans. Neither option is ideal, but sometimes we don't get to choose our pandemics. They don't always originate in other animals, and they don't always target humans. Sometimes they are a natural disaster that allows a new pathogen to wreak havoc, and in some cases, they are caused by a massive asteroid impact. Regardless of the cause, though, one thing remains constant. Pandemics are scary, but they are also a natural part of life on Earth. They've allowed species to adapt and evolve for millions of years, and they will continue to shape the future of life on our planet for millions more. And I'm willing to bet they will and be quite as dramatic as the ones we're dealing with right now. Thanks for watching.